The beginning of Andreas Munzer's story sounds almost too simple for someone who would one day become a bodybuilding legend. He was born in 1964 in the tiny village of Pack, tucked away in rural Austria, a place where life followed the rhythm of nature and hard work. No modern gyms, no fancy supplements, just the silence of the mountains and the slow pace of country life. Working with his family in their dairy business, Andreas grew up surrounded by responsibility. While most kids his age were out playing, he was already carrying weight, not the kind you find in a gym, but the weight of early mornings, farm chores, and duties that couldn't be skipped. That environment built a kind of discipline you don't learn from books. Even without luxury, Andreas was never the type to stand still. He played soccer with friends, skied every winter, and somehow still found time to play trumpet in the small village band. Sports and music were his outlets, ways to express energy and creativity in a world that always seemed to demand more than it gave. What's interesting is that, at this stage, Andreas had zero obsession with his physique. No posters of athletes on his wall, no dreams of stepping on stages or winning trophies. He was just an active kid living the countryside routine, learning to work hard and appreciate the small wins in life. Everything started to change because of something that could have easily gone unnoticed: a late bus. As a teenager, he worked as a toolmaker more than 10 kilometers from home, roughly 6.2 miles, and every day he faced long stretches of time waiting for transportation. That kind of waiting feels endless, empty time nobody likes. But that's exactly where destiny quietly stepped in. Tired of wasting hours sitting around, Andreas made a simple decision. He joined a local gym just to fill the time. No big goals, no master plan. It was just a way to turn boredom into movement. What began as a distraction quickly grew into something much bigger. Every set, every rep, every drop of sweat brought Andreas something new: purpose. He still didn't fully understand the bodybuilding world, but he felt like there was something different there, something that pushed him to break one limit after another. Soon, his training partners started noticing something extraordinary. Even without polished technique, Andreas had strength, focus, and a level of dedication that stood out. He was that quiet guy who walked into the gym without drawing attention, but always left everyone impressed with how fast he improved. No complaints, no breaks, no hesitation. It was in that environment, rusty bars, real encouragement, gritty effort, that his friends convinced him to compete for the first time. He didn't know how to pose, didn't understand aesthetics, and wasn't dreaming of pro stages yet. But his intensity surprised everyone who watched him. Over time, the gym stopped being just a place Andreas killed time waiting for the bus. It became his refuge, the one place where he could challenge himself every day and slowly realize he had something special in his hands. By the time the 1980s rolled in, Andreas knew that if he wanted to take bodybuilding seriously, he needed to leave his comfort zone, which, for him, meant leaving Austria. That's when he made one of the boldest decisions of his life: moving to Germany. At the time, that's where the best gyms were, where the most experienced coaches trained, and where the real opportunities in the sport existed. It was a risky leap, but absolutely necessary for someone with big dreams, even if he still didn't say them out loud. In Germany, Andreas met someone who would change everything: Albert Busek. A true legend in European bodybuilding, Busek was a close friend of Arnold Schwarzenegger and a major figure behind the scenes of the sport. Training under his umbrella felt like stepping into an elite field, reserved only for people willing to give everything they had. Andreas wasn't just willing, he was hungry. He was exactly the kind of athlete Busek looked for: disciplined, tough, and unshakably determined. Under Busek's guidance, Andreas was thrown into a world where excuses didn't exist. Training sessions were intense, almost military-like. The routine demanded absolute focus, long days, constant sacrifice, and a level of commitment most people simply couldn't handle. But Andreas didn't just handle it, he thrived. His physical evolution got noticed quickly. That mix of humility, strength, and discipline started building a reputation that spread through word of mouth. It didn't take long for the first bodybuilding magazines to notice the potential of that quiet, tireless Austrian. Photos, articles, interviews, they all started popping up, pushing his name and image far beyond Germany's borders. Once Andreas stepped fully into the competitive scene, everything started moving fast. He was no longer just the dedicated athlete training at Busek's gym. He was proving he belonged among Europe's best. In 1986, his first big international appearance sent a clear message: a sixth-place finish at the European Amateur Championships. It might not sound like a major title, but for someone just starting out, it was like opening the door to a whole new world. It was the kind of result that quietly says, he's here. Over the next 2 years, Andreas followed a path so consistent that even the most experienced people in the sport took notice. In both 1987 and 1988, he placed third at the World Amateur Championships, one of the most important contests for athletes aiming for global recognition. His turning point came in 1989 when Andreas won the IFBB World Games, a massive achievement that crowned years of sacrifice, discipline, and relentless effort. But beyond the trophy, something even more valuable came with it: the long-awaited pro card. That card is the passport into the professional world, the moment when a promising amateur officially becomes an elite athlete. For Andreas, it was like climbing a mountain only to realize there was an even bigger one waiting ahead. And that mountain had a name: Mr. Olympia. In the same year he turned pro, Andreas stepped onto the biggest stage in bodybuilding for the first time. Just being there is a dream most athletes never reach. And even as a rookie, he finished 13th at the 1989 Mr. Olympia. It might seem far from the top, but for a debut, it's a clear sign of respect. He stood among giants, and he didn't blend into the background. When Andreas Munzer stepped on stage, it felt like you were looking at something beyond what the human body should be able to achieve. Standing 1.73 meters tall, 5 feet 8 inches, and weighing around 108 kilograms, 238 pounds, at his best, he looked sculpted by hand, like every muscle had been placed with surgical precision. But what really shocked the audience wasn't the size. It was the insane level of conditioning. His skin was so thin it revealed fibers, deep cuts, and striations that very few athletes in history have ever matched. The numbers speak for themselves: 21-inch arms, a 58-inch chest, and roughly 3% body fat year-round. For an average person, that's impossible. For most athletes, it's unthinkable. But Andreas turned his physique into a living display of vascularity, symmetry, and muscle separation. It was like every muscle told a story, every detail screamed discipline at the highest level. That's why he quickly became a global reference for conditioning. Pros, photographers, and even judges saw in Andreas an almost unreachable standard. His physique became the subject of studies, inspiration, and even technical articles. Behind the scenes, athletes used to say he looked factory dehydrated because his dryness and muscle detail looked unreal. To this day, many say no one has ever replicated exactly what he brought to the stage. What makes it even more interesting is that his intimidating look didn't match his personality. Quite the opposite. Andreas was known as one of the most humble athletes on the circuit. He greeted fans, helped beginners backstage, and kept a polite, respectful attitude, far from arrogance. That blend of superhuman appearance with genuine kindness created a powerful connection with people, something money or titles could never buy. His image exploded worldwide, earning him magazine covers and features in Flex, Muscle Mag, and many others. Photographers fought for a chance to shoot him, and every photo shoot turned into an event. Andreas was no longer just a competitor. He had become a visual icon in bodybuilding, and that fame, fueled by the most defined physique ever seen, opened the door to bigger expectations and to a price he didn't yet realize he would have to pay. Andreas Munzer's routine was so intense that most athletes couldn't imagine keeping up with it. He trained 6 days a week, always twice a day, with no real breaks or mental downtime. Every session was treated like a sacred commitment, and taking it easy was not an option. It was sweat, discipline, and total focus. Among all muscle groups, legs were his biggest obsession. Andreas believed they were his weak point, so he made leg day the center of his entire routine. Deep squats, endless sets of leg extensions, training so heavy it left anyone exhausted just watching. He turned that supposed weakness into a ritual of constant self-improvement. His training style was almost military. Every rep was executed with surgical precision, every set pushed to maximum intensity as if it were his last. There was no improvising, no half-doing a workout. Everything was planned, calculated, and taken to the limit. Watching him train was like watching a craftsman sculpt his own body, someone who saw muscle as raw material and pain as a tool for shaping it. His diet followed the same extreme pattern. During his growth phase, he consumed up to 8,000 calories a day, loaded with rice, chicken, eggs, and dense carbs. But once cutting season arrived, everything flipped. His intake dropped to 2,000 calories a day, even while training twice daily. It was like driving a race car with the tank almost empty and still expecting it to perform at full speed. And just imagine how the body reacts to something like that. But the peak of extremism happened in the days leading up to competitions. To achieve that impossibly dry, carved, shredded look, Andreas cut his water intake down to just 500 milliliters per day, about 16 ounces, while following harsh dehydration protocols. The combination was risky, dangerous, and far too heavy for any body to endure. Behind the absolutely mind-blowing physique Andreas Münzer brought to the stage, there was a much darker reality, a chemical routine that pushed past anything imaginable. He took up to 40 pills a day, plus multiple injections every single day. It was like living inside a clock where every hour marked another dose, another compound, another step in a process that never let his body rest. Among the substances he used continuously were testosterone, parabolin, halotestin, and dianabol, a powerful, aggressive lineup. On top of that came growth hormone, insulin, and an absurd amount of strong diuretics like Lasix and aldactone. These compounds were combined in brutal cycles with no breaks, no off weeks, not even a moment for his body to breathe. For Andreas, stopping meant going backward, and going backward was never an option. Keeping up with this lifestyle had a price, and it wasn't just physical. Financially, Andreas spent more than 10,000 German marks per month solely on drugs. That was more than many athletes earned in an entire year. To afford all of it, he maintained an insane schedule of appearances, around 40 events a year, including photo shoots, seminars, exhibitions, travel, and guest posing. Instead of resting, his body was dragged from stage to stage, always pushed, never recovering. This exhausting routine created a never-ending cycle. More appearances required more prep work required more substances, and more substances required more money. It was a wheel that kept spinning faster and faster, and Andreas, without realizing it, was stuck right in the middle. And this is where the story gets even heavier. Andreas never took breaks between his steroid cycles. Instead of letting his body recover its natural levels, he just added more and more compounds. His organs worked at full throttle, non-stop, without rest, without any chance to stabilize. This is the point where the pursuit of perfection crosses the line and becomes dependence, not only chemical, but emotional. At the beginning of 1996, Andreas Münzer's body started sending warning signs that could no longer be ignored. Intense, deep abdominal pain became part of his daily life. But true to his extreme discipline, Andreas chose to stay silent. He was used to pain. Pain was part of his career, his method, his identity as an athlete. But this time it was different. This pain didn't ask for attention, it demanded it. To keep training, Andreas made a decision that reveals just how far his determination had gone. He started using Nubain, an opioid painkiller normally used in hospitals, mainly for post-surgery pain. It's a heavy medication meant for extreme situations, and Andreas was using it simply to keep lifting weights as if nothing was happening. He numbed the symptom, but never treated the cause. It was like putting a bandage on something that needed surgery. And with every workout, his body sank deeper. Even weakened, even feeling his body failing from the inside, Andreas stepped onto the stage at the 1996 Arnold Classic, one of the most important competitions in the world. And, surprisingly, he placed sixth. But for anyone watching from the outside, that result hid a cruel truth. He wasn't competing against other athletes anymore. He was competing against his own limit. His conditioning still impressed people. After all, his extreme dryness hid any sign of fragility. But behind the bright lights, his body was already collapsing. After the Arnold Classic, everything simply fell apart. Without another major show immediately ahead, Andreas' body could no longer hold the illusion of strength. The pain got worse, the weakness increased, and every movement seemed to demand more than he could give. It was as if all those years of superhuman effort had chosen that exact moment to finally collect the bill. And this is one of those moments in the story where we can't help but wonder, is it worth continuing when everything around you is telling you it's time to stop? This period marks the saddest turning point in Andreas' life. He was no longer fighting to improve or to win. He was fighting just to stay on his feet. But even then, it still wasn't the end. His trip back home should have been just another flight in Andreas Munzer's hectic schedule, but it became the moment when everything collapsed for good. Still weakened, he boarded the plane back to Austria thinking he could simply rest and recover. But during the flight, the damage hidden behind years of extreme effort finally surfaced. Andreas began coughing up blood, startling passengers and exposing the seriousness of the situation. It was his body screaming, in the most desperate way possible, that it couldn't take any more. The pilot, realizing the urgency, didn't hesitate. He made an emergency landing, and the moment the plane touched the ground, a medical team was already waiting. Andreas was rushed to the hospital, where doctors quickly understood this wasn't something minor. It wasn't a muscle injury, it wasn't dehydration, and it wasn't ordinary exhaustion. It was something far deeper, the result of years spent pushing limits no human body was built to withstand. The scene is hard to imagine. One of the most impressive athletes in the world, someone seen as almost indestructible, now depended on machines and medical staff just to stay alive. The man who seemed able to overcome anything was now facing a battle he couldn't win with willpower, discipline, or the flawless physique that had amazed so many. On March 14, 1996, at just 31 years old, Andreas Munzer lost that silent fight. The cause? Multiple organ failure. It was the tragic result of a body pushed to its absolute limit for far too long, with no rest, no pause, no relief. His death didn't only shock friends and family. It shook the entire bodybuilding community, which suddenly saw one of its greatest symbols disappear in a brutal, unexpected way. Andreas' collapse forced the sport to confront its own dark side. What many admired, the extreme physique, the absolute discipline, now stood as a warning, a call for reflection. When the doctors examined Andreas Munzer's body, the full extent of what had destroyed him appeared in devastating detail. His liver, one of the organs most overwhelmed by continuous drug use, was loaded with huge tumors, and half of it had turned into unusable mass. It was a clear sign that his body had been trying to resist far longer than it should have. His heart, which should have weighed a little over 300 grams, around 10 to 11 ounces, weighed 636 grams, almost double the normal size. That extra weight wasn't strength, it was overload. Years of chemical stimulation and extreme strain had made it grow abnormally until it could no longer do its job. His kidneys also showed severe damage, inflamed and functioning poorly. His pancreas showed fibrosis, revealing deep injuries that affected digestion and hormone production. Even his testicles, worn down by non-stop hormonal cycles, showed atrophy and cysts, signs of a completely disrupted system. Andreas' blood told another dramatic story. It was thick, dehydrated, and critically low in potassium, a direct result of strong diuretics and drastic water restriction in the days before competitions. Oxygen struggled to circulate, his organs weren't receiving what they needed, and every heartbeat had to work 2 or 3 times harder. During the autopsy, whole halotestin tablets were found in his stomach, showing that his body could no longer absorb anything. It was simply shutting down. In total, around 20 different substances were found in Andreas' system, and his arms showed the marks of countless injections, physical evidence of the routine he followed for years. They weren't just marks on his skin. They were the marks of a life lived with no breaks, no recovery, no chance for the body to breathe. News of Andreas Munzer's death spread through the bodybuilding world like a shockwave. The entire community was stunned. How could someone so disciplined, so focused, so seemingly unshakable be gone so suddenly? To many, Andreas looked indestructible, a living example of absolute dedication. His sudden passing made fans, athletes, and coaches wonder where the line truly sits between the pursuit of excellence and the danger of going too far. Among the most meaningful tributes was one from Arnold Schwarzenegger, Andreas' idol, and one of the most respected names in the history of the sport. Arnold sent a wreath with the message, "A last salute to a friend." A simple but powerful gesture that showed the respect and admiration between them. The two had met in person at the Arnold Classic shortly before Andreas' death. But as the days passed, something started to bother a lot of people. Andreas was being remembered more for his death than for his career. His accomplishments, his work ethic, and his legendary physique were slowly overshadowed by the tragedy that dominated the headlines. It was as if everything he built had been swallowed up by the scandal of his fall. That's when athletes like Nasser El-Sanbati decided to speak up. In interviews, Nasser said that Andreas didn't use more substances than other competitors at the time. To him, the real problem was the pressure of the system, a harsh routine that demanded Andreas stay in extreme condition year-round, with no off-season, no breaks, and no chance for his body to recover even the bare minimum. According to Nasser, it wasn't just a matter of personal choice, but of expectations pushed by coaches, managers, and even the bodybuilding industry itself. This debate opened a deep wound in the sport. Who is responsible? Is it the athlete who chooses to cross the line? Is it the coaches and managers who demand results at any cost? Or is it the competitive system itself, which rewards only the most extreme physiques, no matter the price? When you look at everything Andreas Munzer achieved during his career, it becomes clear that his impact was far greater than any trophy could represent. Even without winning the Mr. Olympia, he reached his best placing, 9th, 3 times on one of the toughest stages in the world. And for many fans and experts, that doesn't even matter compared to what he truly left behind. Andreas became synonymous with extreme conditioning, a technical reference that athletes, photographers, and coaches still study today. His definition, symmetry, and muscle separation are still considered almost unbeatable. But Andreas' life also became a powerful warning. His dedication, once admired, now sparks reflection. How far is it worth going in the name of physical perfection? Where does the pursuit of progress end and self-destruction begin? His story exposes the dangers of aesthetic obsession and the constant pressure for extreme results, something many athletes still struggle with. After hearing such an intense and deeply human journey, it's impossible not to stop for a moment and think. Andreas Munzer's story isn't just about bodybuilding. It's about choices, limits, and how our decisions shape every step we take. And if this video made you think, feel, or even look at the sport from a new perspective, then I want to ask you one simple but important thing. Drop a like. It helps the channel a lot and shows that you want more deep stories like this. If you believe in what we're creating here and want to support our work even further, consider becoming a channel member. And of course, if you're not subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the stories we're preparing with great care. And I also want to hear from you. This space exists because you're on the other side watching, thinking, and building this community with us. So tell me in the comments, what struck you the most about Andreas' journey? Do you think it's worth chasing the absolute limit of the human body? Or should balance always come first? Your opinion matters, and it's what makes this channel truly alive. Before you go, let me leave you with one last invitation. Right here on the screen, another video is about to pop up, and I'm sure it'll grab your attention just as much as this one. It's another real, intense story, full of lessons that will make you think. Click on it and stay with us. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.